Oral questions the honourable member from Regina Capel.
Day after day brings new sordid details about the employment minister's scandal. And yesterday we learned that his company shares a mailing address with an international drug trafficker who's been busted for cocaine not once but twice. He's been caught out in falsehoods, caught faking Indigenous identity to try to secure government contracts meant for real Indigenous people, and his company is under investigation for 9 fraud-related counts. Why on earth has the Prime Minister not fired this man?
Right.
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, I don't know the person referred to in that article. I've never met that person. It's stated in the article, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
Let's recap the scandal so far. He said he was Indigenous, even though he wasn't. He said his great-grandmother was Cree, even though she wasn't. He said there was another Randy working at the company, even though there wasn't, that he had nothing to do with the company while he was in cabinet, even though he was, and his company got a contract while he was sitting around the cabinet table. In a normal government, any one of those scandals would be cause for dismissal.
Yeah, that's right.
So why in this wacko Liberal government does this man still sit in cabinet?
I ask members to be very judicious in their use of words. The
Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has already answered this question many times. The question that we still haven't had an answer for is why the Conservative leader's scandal, who refuses to seek his security clearance and protect himself and his future members during the next election, what is he hiding? When he refuses to get information about the risks of foreign interference for the upcoming elections? Thank you. I would ask the honourable member to not speak until the chair recognizes him.
Regina Capel.
Well, we don't know what it'll take for this guy to get fired from this Prime Minister. We do know what will get you fired. Remember Jody Wilson-Raybould? She was fired for telling the truth about the Prime Minister's attempts to interfere in a criminal case. Here's what she had to say. A Prime Minister committed to true reconciliation would have removed this minister and the other Randy from cabinet long ago. Instead, we get to watch white people play Ancestry Wheel of Fortune. Ouch. How come under this Prime Minister, a strong Indigenous woman gets fired for telling the truth when a weak, fake Indigenous man gets to keep his job after lying?
Again, I'm going to ask the honourable member from Regina Capel, who once sat in this chair, to withdraw that one word which was directly used to another member, which would not be considered parliamentary, and ask the honourable member to do so.
I'll withdraw the word lying and replace it with telling falsehoods.
The actual word. The word which was being used. I'm going to ask the honourable member to withdraw the word fake, please.
Sorry, just for the Speaker to clarify, the word fake, but the Minister did...
He faked all those things.
The Minister is now admitting that he's not Indigenous, so he pretended to be something that he wasn't.
Colleagues.
Only one solution.
Colleagues, yesterday there were members who were asked to withdraw that very same word, and the member did. And so I'm going to ask the honourable member if he could please do so.
I will withdraw the word fake and replace it with either sham, imitation, counterfeit.
The honourable member.
Here all week, try the deal.
Colleagues, I've always insisted, I'm going to ask all members please not to take the floor while the Speaker is addressing Parliament. When it has been a tradition of this place to ask very tough questions, to keep government accountable. It's important for government, of course, to provide very clear answers. But we try to do this in a way that allows people to treat each other with decorum and respect. And so the honourable member has sat in this chair in this position once before. Yesterday we asked a number of members to, when it was referring to a particular member, to withdraw that same word that I'm just asking for today. I just asked the honourable member just to withdraw that word so we could just move on.
Mr. Speaker, when I sat in that chair, I heard the word fake being used many, many times.
I will come back to this issue later on. I will come back to this issue near the end of question period. Will the Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I think that little display of disrespect for that place is ubiquitous of how Conservative members treat this place. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, it is the very fact that they are trying to distract and make a mockery.
Colleagues. I'm going to ask the honourable member, the honourable members need I'm going to ask the honourable member from Lanark, Hastings, Addington to please. Sorry, forgive me. Lanark, Frontenac. Forgive me, the honourable member from Lanark, Frontenac and Kingston to please not take the floor when he is not recognized to do so. Now, colleagues, I do not know if the Honourable Minister had finished her answer because I was not able to hear her. So I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister to start from the top.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this shameful display of disrespect from the Conservative members of Parliament for this place is on display today, and it is exactly how they have been operating for the past couple of weeks. Mr. Speaker, it is time for them to stop filibustering and obstructing the work of Parliament. It is time for them to start respecting this place, respecting the work we do here on behalf of Canadians. We have deposited up to 29,000 pages worth of documents. They need to stop these games and let everybody get back to work on behalf of Canadians. Thank you.
I'm going to ask the honourable member from St. Margaret, South Shore, to please not take the floor. And to all colleagues, we are wasting a fair bit of time. And to making sure that members get going, we might have to cut a couple of questions from today. So let us make sure that we follow up very carefully and we listen to the instructions. The
Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. What time is it for? It's time for the Minister to fire the Minister of Official Languages. He says he's an Indigenous person, even though he's not. He claims his great-grandmother is Cree, and that's false. He's not the Randy from the texts who runs GHI, but we now know that there's only one Randy in the company. Worse still, the company in which he's a shareholder received government contracts while he was in cabinet. The Minister of Official Languages must do the only honourable thing, resign in shame. Will the Prime Minister fire his imposter of a minister? The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has answered this question. He has said what he said at committee, and this is absolutely false, what they're saying. The Conservatives need to stop these partisan and political games. They don't lead us anywhere. They need to respect this place and allow it to return to work and to make sure we can all do the work that Canadians have sent us here for. I would ask everyone once again to be very judicious in the choice of the words they use. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Official Languages is not only an imposter, he's a chameleon. He will stop at nothing to advance his own interests. Suddenly, he's the journalist and political commentator at Radio-Canada and Les Affaires, even though he's never written a single article. Then there's all the other Randys. The Indigenous Randy, the Randy who isn't him, the business partner Randy, the text message Randy. Sorry. I keep interrupting the member, but now he's skating on the other side of the line. He's referring to the first name of a minister, and, well, regardless, he's made 5 references to this, and this is not okay. So I ask the honourable member to find another way of asking his question, and I ask him to start his question again, please. Mr. Speaker, there's a quite simple way to end the use of the name Randy in this House, to use the name of the other Randy. It's if the Prime Minister would fire the Minister of Official Languages. When will the Prime Minister end this big masquerade and fire all the Randys? He could even hit a home run by just firing the Minister of Official Languages. Will the Prime Minister fire this imposter of a Minister of Official Languages? Truly, you have put me in a very uncomfortable situation. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, this is unbelievable what the Conservative members are doing today. They are showing they have no respect for this place, for democracy in Canada, or as what you're saying as Speaker of this House. There are Canadians who are watching the circus that they are doing on the other side, and the Conservative members are making a joke of this place. It is the seat of our democracy, and this is really shameful. Thank you.
Bonne réponse.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Radio-Canada has obtained documents proving that the CRA has known for months that it is a veritable sieve when it comes to fraud. Since November 2023, it has known that fraudsters were receiving fake tax refunds. But instead of sounding the alarm, the CRA is covering it up. It hides from taxpayers the fact that over $100 million has been stolen from them this year. It hides from them the fact that 31,000 of them have had their personal information stolen. And instead of trying to fix this, it has decided to hunt down their employees to silence whistleblowers. Will the minister clean house as necessary? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What my colleague is saying is false. We've hidden nothing. As soon as there is information that is learned about potential fraud, I can assure you that we take this situation very seriously, that the persons involved are immediately questioned, their accounts are blocked. We identify the fraudsters, and there are other consequences. And we report to the Treasury Board and to the privacy commissioners, among others. Thank you. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Impressive. When it comes to crisis management, the CRA is an example not to be followed. Here's how they don't deal with fraud. 1. Hide the crisis until it ends up in the newspaper. 2. Hide the theft of personal information from the privacy commissioner. And 3. Hunt whistleblowers instead of fraudsters. In short, CRA executives don't want to solve the problem. They just don't want to be blamed for it. Their top priority is to protect their own backs. Will the minister get her priorities straight? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm ready to do what we have to, and I'm already doing it because what my colleague is saying is false. It's completely untrue. We've hidden nothing. As soon as we see there's a potential fraud, we block accounts, we seek out the fraudsters, we make reports. Yes, we report according to the processes. We do it quarterly. We do it to the Treasury Board, to the AG, and to public accounts. The Honourable Member for Rosemont La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the cost of living is up, rents are up, groceries are up, and the Liberals have turned their backs on everyone. The Conservatives are going to be cutting everywhere, and it's going to make people's lives even more expensive. Quebecers need better than this. They deserve a break. The NDP is proposing to remove the GST on groceries, on heating bills, internet, cell phones, and for once, we're going to make big, rich CEOs pay. Will the Liberals to have the courage to do this? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we agree for once with the NDP. It's true the Conservatives don't have a plan. They just want to cut. They want to cut health care, cut daycare. They want to cut to other assistance. We know what the Conservative plan is, but if there's one thing that people who are watching us at home know, on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we believe in investing in Canadians. We believe of investing in families and in health, because countries that are sure of themselves invest in their citizens. Thank you.
Member from Elmwood Transcona.
Mr. Speaker, Manitoba families are paying more and getting less at grocery stores. Prices are going up on everyday items and the size of the packaging is getting smaller. Families need a break. They need relief now.
That's right.
The Liberals are letting people down, and people in my riding know that Conservatives will cut and gut the important things we need, costing families thousands of dollars. The NDP will help families by removing GST off essentials like groceries, kids' clothing, and diapers. Why won't this government give families the break they need and remove the GST now?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Our Liberal government has been working to help families put food on the table and in their kids' lunch boxes. We know the Conservative leader will pursue dangerous cuts. The difference couldn't be more stark, Mr. Speaker. While Liberals work to ensure kids have foods, Conservatives will cut these programs that Canadian families are relying on. I don't know what the Conservatives leader's obsession is with these dangerous cuts, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that either the employment minister or the other Randy actually might also be moonlighting as a magician. We know he says he's Indigenous, even though he's not. We know he stole from Indigenous Canadians. We know he said he wasn't involved in the company when he was in cabinet, but he was. But today, perhaps as a magician, he has made his business partners disappear. Shauna Parker and Felix Papineau have disconnected their phone numbers, they deactivated their emails, and they are nowhere to be found to avoid the scrutiny of this Parliament. So will the minister stand up, wave his magic wand, and tell his business partners to show up here?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. It's really unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, to hear so many falsehoods and so little time in this House. It's really unfortunate that the Conservatives are investing all of their energy in falsehoods that are derailing the House and detract from the work of the House, from what's important, and that is working for Quebecers and Canadians. But one thing that we still don't know the answer to is why the Conservative leader, who sits next to the member, has not sought his security clearance so they can protect all members during the next election.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
If the minister doesn't know where to find these individuals, perhaps he can ask the other Randy, who's still very much in contact with those partners. But even the Liberals are taking note of this humiliating and fraudulent affair. Liberals like Jody Wilson-Raybould, who called it, quote, so shameful and extremely destructive. The Prime Minister fires the first Indigenous Attorney General, but keeps the first fake Indigenous Employment Minister. That's some version of reconciliation. When is the Prime Minister going to fire the Employment Minister and the other Randy?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the minister has addressed those issues. He has stated that what the member opposite said is false. But, Mr. Speaker, what we want to know is why is the leader of the opposition silencing his members of parliament? Why won't he allow his members of parliament to speak on behalf of their constituents and advocate for their communities? Mr. Speaker, all we hear from the leader of the opposition is silencing his own members of parliament, Mr. Speaker. Why won't he just let them speak? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Employment is embroiled in allegations of fraud. He almost certainly violated the Conflict of Interest Act. He got caught pretending to be Indigenous in an effort to steal government contracts from legitimately owned Indigenous businesses. And we now learn that the minister has a business connection to a cocaine trafficker. In the face of all of that, why is he still in cabinet?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. The member has once again combined all sorts of falsehoods to make some sense of the story, but the minister has answered these questions on several opportunities. All of this is false, and we still don't know, however, how the member who asked the question will protect himself against foreign interference during the upcoming election if his Conservative leader refuses to seek his security clearance. How will he know if he's protected from foreign interference under the next election?
Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, one must ask why the Prime Minister hasn't seen fit to fire this minister. Could it be that the Prime Minister violated the Conflict of Interest Act not once, but twice? Could it be that the Prime Minister is a cultural appropriator, having worn blackface more times than he can remember? Isn't it the case that if the Prime Minister were to fire the minister, he'd have to fire himself?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, what Canadians are witnessing today is very disturbing, Mr. Speaker. On many occasions, you had questions that were asked and answer that was provided, Mr. Speaker. But the real issue that Canadians are asking at home is why the leader of the Conservative would not get the security clearance, would not get the briefing, and would not do his job, Mr. Speaker. That's what Canadians are concerned about. Get the clearance, get the briefing, and do your job, man.
I invite all members to ensure that they ask their questions to the Speaker. That they speak through the Speaker, whether or not they ask questions or give answers. The
Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. The Minister of Official Languages said he was Indigenous so he can get money for Indigenous companies, even though he's not. Also, the famous Randy, he says isn't him, even though we know there's only one Randy there. He's an imposter and a charlatan. He's corrupt. On several occasions, I have asked all members to be very cautious in terms of the language that they are using. This time, the language that is being used directly impugns another member of this place, and I would ask the honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles to ask his question again and to retract his comments and to re-ask his question. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Official Languages has said he's Indigenous. I would ask you to remove your comments first, retract them, and then start your question again. The honourable member for Saint-Charles. I'd like to retract that he's a fraudster and corrupt, and I will say instead that he has committed fraud and corruption. Is that okay? No. That won't work. I would ask members to follow the members of other who asked the question yesterday, and their retraction was acceptable. So I'd ask the member once again, please, to retract his comments and then ask his question again. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. We can't say the minister is a fraudster and corrupt. Instead, there are allegations of fraud and corruption with respect to this minister, and I would ask the Prime Minister to remove him from cabinet. The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Our colleague from Charlebourg-Saint-Charles is obviously just having a hard time expressing himself today, but one thing we do agree on is that the whole story of his Conservative leader who saying that the agreement we have with the government of Quebec is to build 8,000 housing units, but he said there are none, but there are dozens in his own riding. So these units are being built. So when will he ask his Conservative leader to go himself and see that there are truly projects in his riding? The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. The minister is trying to divert from the question, but the Minister of Official Languages in 2015 said that he was a journalist and even worked for Radio Canada and Les Affaires. We know it's not true, Mr. Speaker. Also, he also led people to believe he was Indigenous to get funds for Indigenous companies. He no longer deserves to be in cabinet. Will the Prime Minister show him the door? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. The Minister has already answered these questions, but what we still haven't heard, Mr. Speaker, is the opinion of the Conservative member for Charlebourg in terms of his riding and the projects that are being built. There are dozens of affordable housing units that have been built with the agreement with the Quebec government that we signed. But his Conservative leader is saying that these units don't exist. When he show all of us, ask his leader to go visit these wonderful housing units that his leader says don't exist.
I'm a member from St. Margaret's, South Shore St. Margaret's, for the second time today to not take the floor when not recognized. I would not like to remind him a third time.
The Honourable Member for The honourable member for Avignon, La Matisse, Matane, Matapedia. The federal government has once again made a clean getaway on passports, while the federal government is being questioned about its border plan in the face of Donald Trump's deportation threats. Radio Canada reveals that the federal government issued a passport to a criminal smuggler known to authorities, a repeat human trafficker, a man implicated in the deaths of 9 migrants in the river last spring. This man was given a passport by Service Canada. How is it possible to be so dangerously incompetent? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Mr. Speaker, if what she's alleging is true, I will do verifications with Service Canada and other safety agencies, and I'd be happy to report back to the House then after when the time comes. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Beauport. Beauport-Limoilou. Do you understand why we're worried about the federal government's lack of preparation for Trump's deportations? While the feds are telling us that everything's okay at the borders, we're learning that they're giving a passport to a notorious criminal smuggler. Once again, when it comes to border management, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing in Ottawa. It's a madhouse. Are there any more criminal smugglers out there with brand new passports to cross borders as they please? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Mr. Speaker, as I clearly said during my previous answer, I'd be happy to come back to the House to present exactly what happened. If the alleged facts are true and this passport should not have been issued, we will check into this. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. The criminal smuggler in question was arrested in 2008 for possession of 2 passports in other names. Then he was arrested again in 2017 for human trafficking, and once again in 2021, following which the federal government confiscated his passport. And after all that, he reapplied for a passport, and the federal authorities delivered another one to him in 2023. How can we ignore the fact that criminal smugglers are running the show at the borders right under the federal government's nose? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, our government has invested greatly and will continue to do so in protecting our borders. We reversed the cuts that the previous Conservative government applied to Canada Border Services, and we gave RCMP the necessary tools to obviously work with their American partners to ensure the safety of our border. And I was very proud a few weeks ago of RCMP operation with our U.S. partners to ensure that many human smugglers and drug smugglers are now charged and facing criminal prosecution.
The Honourable Member from Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands and Vito Lakes.
To get government contracts, the Liberal minister from Edmonton said that he was Indigenous, but he's not. He said that he wasn't the Randy who was involved in the ongoing operations of the company that was applying for government contracts, but text messages show that he was. Now, he also said he wasn't directing his company from the cabinet table, but we know that that's also not true. Not true, not true, and not true. So we don't know which minister they're going to stand up, but what we want to know from that minister is, do they think that that behavior is appropriate, and do they think that he should remain in cabinet?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister has already responded to those questions. But what I find really interesting is that today marks 1,000 days since Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, and we have not heard a single question about this from the Conservative members of Parliament. This is unsurprising for them, given the fact that when it comes to their support for Ukraine, it has been wavering over the past year. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we stand for Ukraine. Do the Conservative members of Parliament.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, I'm glad that the minister showed up for work, but she must have been late enough to not hear our statement where we expressed, of course, our support for Ukraine. But let's focus on the facts. The facts are that their cabinet colleague is involved with cocaine traffickers. Their cabinet colleague is pretending to be Indigenous in order to disenfranchise Indigenous-owned companies and Indigenous people. That's who they're in league with. That minister can't seem to tell the truth to save his own life. So Randy or other Randy or pretend Indigenous Randy, none of them should be in cabinet. Why won't they fire this fraudster?
Again, for the second day in a row, I'm going to ask the honourable member from Leeds Grenville to, the very last part of this question, using language which just can't pass in this place. The honourable member, will he just simply withdraw that question and then we can move on? Withdraw that word and then we could just simply move on.
The word fraudster is withdrawn.
I thank the honourable member. The honourable leader of the government of the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess the member opposite wasn't paying attention to my answer because I said we were halfway through question period and I had yet to hear a question from the members opposite about the war of aggression by Russia on Ukraine. And Mr. Speaker, let's look at the facts. This time last year, they were holding up and voting against the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, an agreement that Ukraine had asked us for as an ally. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to meaningful action, they do everything they can to hold back support from Ukraine, and we're seeing that today too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to ask the honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot, please, to not take the floor when not recognized by the chair. The honourable member from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Peterborough. Brock.
Speaker, reports continue to reveal one false statement after another about the employment minister's claim of Indigenous heritage. The fact he is still in cabinet has laid bare the reality that truth and reconciliation mean nothing to Liberals. We found out today the company co-owned by the minister, GHI, is in fact green-lit to bid on government contracts. Wow. This is the same company that falsely claimed to be wholly Indigenous owned while inventing this fictional other Randy and sharing a mailbox with an alleged cocaine smuggler. Will the Prime Minister just end the charade and fire the minister?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It only seems apparent that the Conservatives want to talk about reconciliation when it's allegation, but rather they don't want to talk about reconciliation when we're talking about investing in First Nations housing or helping Indigenous people ensure their opportunities to have economic success or procure from the government of Canada. They don't want to talk about that, Mr. Speaker, because you know why? Their record is shameful, Mr. Speaker. In fact, they have continually cut services for Indigenous people. When they were in power, we will do the opposite.
The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, during committee and just now, the Minister of Indigenous Services refused to defend her colleague, the pretend Indigenous Minister of Employment. The Minister of Employment pretended to be Indigenous so that his company could steal contracts from Indigenous communities and businesses. While the Prime Minister continues to be the defender of the pretender, even his cabinet colleagues are losing faith. Now, this question is for the Minister of Indigenous Services. Will she stand up and defend her cabinet colleague, or should he be fired?
Good.
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
You know, Mr. Speaker, just moments ago I was speaking with the National Chief about the shenanigans that are happening at 9-9 Committee as the Conservatives attempt to undermine the study of the water legislation that so many First Nations have poured their heart and soul into, Mr. Speaker, preventing it from actually getting to this place and hopefully eventually to Senate. They talk about standing up for First Nations people, but when they have the chance to be allies, they completely drop the ball.
The honourable member from Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of living is up. and Canadians can't keep up. Meanwhile, oil and gas CEOs pollute our planet. They gouge Canadians, all while raking in billions in profits. The Liberals have let Canadians down. This past week in Victoria, Common Horizon hosted a Make Them Pay town hall, calling on this government to make rich CEOs pay what they owe. So will the Liberals listen to Canadians and finally put an excess profits tax on big oil and gas?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say that this government has been listening to the voices of Canadians who are concerned about climate change, are also concerned about building an economy that will thrive in a low-carbon future. We have put into place a plan that is cutting carbon emissions that were accelerating under the Harper government. It is just a shame that the NDP has abandoned its commitment on climate change, walking away from the price on pollution, over 100 million tons of excess emissions because of a decision they made to collaborate with the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. On this side of the House, we believe climate change is real, and we are going to...
The Honourable Member for Hamilton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, nobody believes this faux-aggressive Liberal government because they bought a pipeline. But back to the question at hand. Just 10 kilometres from this place, the Ottawa Food Bank is overwhelmed. And last month, like food banks across the country, it saw the highest number of visits than ever before. The cost of living is up, and more people who never thought they would need a food bank need one now. The Liberals have let people down, and the Conservative cuts are only going to make things worse. It is our NDP plan to remove the tax on grocery items, diapers, and food clothing that will finally bring some relief. So will they finally act for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Workforce Development.
When I
Social
visit
Development.
food banks and I speak to volunteers here in Ottawa and across the country, they share with me not only the pride and the importance of what they're doing, but they also share with me the importance of the Canada Child Benefit and how it impacts the families that they serve. Not only the Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker, but also moving forward with the National School Food Programming, ensuring that kids at school have access to food when they need it. I won't be lectured by the Conservative MPs when time after time...
The Honourable Member from Kings Hants.
It has been widely reported that Conservative MPs have written to the Minister of Housing advocating for their communities to receive federal funding for new housing. And that's exactly what MPs should do. But what is shocking is that the Conservative...
I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Miramichi Grand Lake, please, not to take the floor unless recognized. I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Kings Hants to start again.
Speaker, it has widely been reported that Conservative MPs have written to the Minister of Housing advocating for their communities to receive federal housing money, and that's exactly what MPs should do. But what is shocking is that the Conservative leader has banned them from advocating for their communities and imposed a gag order from them even talking about these initiatives just because he wants to cut housing funding. Can the Minister of Housing encourage Conservative MPs to find their voice or provide them a witness protection program so they can keep communicating? And can he explain what the Conservative leader's cuts would do to home building in this country, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Let me start by thanking my honourable colleague for advocating on behalf of his communities, because that is indeed the role that members of Parliament play. In fact, his advocacy has helped secure millions of dollars for communities like Wolfville, East Hants, West Hants, Kings County. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was shocked to learn that the Conservative leader planned to cut these investments when they were going towards building more homes in my province of Nova Scotia. By the way, it's working with a 23% increase in home starts this year. But I was more stunned to see the Conservative members of Parliament abiding by their leader's instruction, refusing to advocate for their communities. If they need witness protection, I'd be happy to speak to the Minister of Public Safety on their behalf.
The Honourable Member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou. Order.
Speaker, 8-year-old Tori Stafford was brutally and viciously murdered by Terry Lynn McClintock and her boyfriend in a sexually motivated killing. Currently, McClintock lives in a townhouse-style jail in Ontario in medium security. That jail also houses a mother-child program. When I visited there, I was appalled to see that there were children in that jail at that security level in the townhouse-style complex. How could this Liberal government allow child killers in the same jail as children?
The Honourable Minister for Public Security.
Mr. Speaker, the safety of children who participate in this long-standing mother-child program is obviously a top priority for the Correctional Service. There are rigorous eligibility criteria in place to participate in this program. It includes child welfare screening completed by Provincial Family Services, as well as ensuring that people residing in the mother-child living unit have not been convicted of any offense against a child. Mr. Speaker, my colleague knows this program has been in existence for 24 years, and no child has ever been harmed in any way during this program's implementation.
The Honourable Member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, these living units are townhouses literally right next to each other. And if they're going to screen people, why aren't they screening the sex offender killer that lives next door? Mr. Speaker, this is the time to show courage and not cowardice, and this minister is doing the complete opposite. This comes back to Bill C-83 that allowed people like McClintock, Bernardo, and Rafferty to serve their sentences in the least restrictive measure. Victims are owed an apology. Is this minister going to reverse these failed policies and get rid of children with sex offenders?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, this member does a disservice and is disrespectful to the victims of these very people he keeps naming in this House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, the persons he just named are inmates in federal correctional facilities. He pretends that the most important criteria for their incarceration is not the public safety of Canadians. He knows that that's false, and he does a disservice to continually name these people in the House of Commons. We're thinking of the victims of these horrible people and don't think that he should continually drag their names out in this House.
The Honourable Member from Peterborough-Kawartha.
Tori Stafford was 8 years old when she was lured from school by a monster. Tori never made it home. She was beaten, tortured, sexually assaulted, and murdered by Terry Lynn McClintock and Michael Rafferty. Today, Terry Lynn McClintock lives in a cozy townhouse with free access to the mother-child program. Yes, you heard that correctly. A child killer has free access to children in prison. In what universe is this okay?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows that the facts that she just alleged are entirely fabricated. She says, Mr. Speaker, in what universe would that
I'm going to invite the Honourable Minister to withdraw that comment because saying that someone has told a deliberate falsehood in this place is not considered parliamentary. So I'll ask the Honourable Member to order! I'll invite the Honourable Minister to withdraw those comments and to start from the top.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to withdraw those words. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for honourable members in this House that allege a series of circumstances to be sure that they're accurate. And when the honourable member says in what scenario would that particular conduct that she alleges be appropriate, The answer, Mr. Speaker, is in no scenario in Canada. So she can wonder why she keeps talking about issues that she knows are entirely inaccurate, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to ask the honourable member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou to please not take this is for the second time today, and I'd ask him not to take the floor unless recognized by the Speaker, which he has been for questions. L'honorable député de Bellechasse.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government is rewarding criminals and turning its back on victims. Bail and house arrest for dangerous criminals is beyond comprehension. The latest discouraging indication of a broken system, the case of a woman who sexually abused and killed an 8-year-old girl who can now have access to children in prison, courtesy of this government, which has passed laws that make life easy for dangerous people. Why does the Liberal government let child killers have contact with kids in prison, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, at no time will the government allow that type of scenario to occur. My colleague knows full well that the program she referred to has been around since 2001, Mr. Speaker. So all the years under the former Harper government, that program was in existence. The top priority, of course, is the safety of the children, and I have full confidence that the Correctional Service will apply that criterion seriously. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, Donald Trump has doubled down on his plan to deport millions of people. Yesterday, he talked about declaring a national state of emergency to free up the necessary resources. Once again, there's every reason to fear a wave of migrants at our borders. And once again, we get the sense that the criminal trafficking networks are one step ahead of the federal government. The government says, they keep saying they're ready for it, that they have a plan. But until we get a peek at it, how are we supposed to take their word for it? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we clearly share the concerns of all Canadians to make sure the border is safe. This is a commitment we've made from the outset. We've invested significantly in making sure that the CBSA and the RCMP have the funding they need to ensure that the border is indeed safe. Mr. Speaker, good news. The RCMP Commissioner has reaffirmed that they have everything they need to do their job, and we have full confidence in their work. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. That's interesting, Mr. Speaker. As we ponder whether the federal government has enough resources to deal with a wave of migrants and whether the human trafficking networks are one step ahead of them, yesterday the government announced a reduction in hours of operation at 35 border crossings, including 10 in Quebec. So they say that they have all the necessary resources in place, but at the same time, they're cutting hours of operation. This is obviously contradictory and worrisome. Are they aware of the message they're now sending to human traffickers? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, this is precisely why we harmonized our hours of operation with our U.S. counterparts. That will enable us to reassign resources as needed in other places where they're needed, where there's pressures. This is a discussion that's been ongoing for years with the U.S. government. We're working together, and it will also enable us to apply the Safe Third Country Agreement if, for example, the border is closed on one side and not on the other. By harmonizing our hours, we'll be able to send people back to the U.S.
The Prime Minister said paying his carbon tax is more important than buying groceries or paying rent. He obviously believes that feeding his obese bureaucracy is more important than Canadians feeding their family. Documents reveal just to administer the carbon tax will cost Canadians more than $800 million by 2030, an increase of 163%. This is at a time when more than 2 million Canadians were forced to a food bank in a single month. If the Prime Minister really believes that Canadians, it's more important to pay the carbon tax than feed their families, call a carbon tax now, and let's find out.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, every time the Conservative Party of Canada talks about the issue of climate change, they never talk about how it's costing Canadians, just for the month of July and August of this year, $7 billion in climate damages, Mr. Speaker. A record, and the year is not yet over. They may have decided to let Canadians down and let the planet burn, but on this side of the House, we're here for Canadians, we're here to fight climate change, and we're here to build the economy of the 21st century.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
The documents reveal just as much pain that the carbon tax inflicts on Canadians. They will be paying more than $800 million just to administer the carbon tax. Not only have the costs skyrocketed, but the number of bureaucrats just to manage this scam has doubled. Let's put that in perspective. Farmers will pay $1 billion in carbon taxes by 2030. So the Prime Minister is putting the family farm at risk just to feed his bloated bureaucracy. If he really feels that Canadian families want to pay the carbon tax over feeding their own kids, call a carbon tax election and let's find out.
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my honourable colleague's question, but it's important to note when he and the Conservative Party of Canada was in power, the way they dealt with agriculture was slashed $500 million from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. They slashed $200 million from the Business Risk Management Program. If that's the track you want to be on, it's a track of destruction, and we are not on that path as a government, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from South Shore St. Margaret's.
The Radical Environment Minister continues to hold financial interest in Cycle Capital, which benefited the most from the billion-dollar Liberal Green Slush Fund. And today, once again, the Liberals are refusing to produce the uncensored documents for the House and the RCMP on the slush fund. The Liberal cover-up, the obstruction of justice, has been going on for 6 months. Wow. When will the Prime Minister come clean? Send the uncensored documents to the RCMP, and including everything that this corrupt Environment Minister is involved in.
This is not going to be a surprise to members. I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from South Shore St. Margaret's to remove that word, which he knows, into talking about the Honourable Minister. And I'm going to ask the Honourable Member to simply withdraw those words.
I'll withdraw those words that stuffed his pockets with.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Member just to simply withdraw the words, and we will move on.
He stuffed his pockets with the money. I'm sorry, he's not corrupt. He stuffed his pockets.
It's been delayed too long. The Honourable the Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, the level of disrespect that Conservative members of Parliament are not just showing this place, but are also showing to you is completely unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, we, as of November 8th, have deposited nearly 29,000 pages of documents in regard to this matter. Mr. Speaker, it is only Conservative members of Parliament that are filibustering and obstructing this place. They are not standing on moral, they are not standing on principle, they are simply trying to hold back the good work that we need to do for Canadians. And Mr. Speaker, their disrespectful behavior is just one more example of their inappropriate behavior here in this place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Don Valley East.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week we found out the Conservative leader was silencing his members from supporting any federal funding for housing in their communities. It must have been very difficult for Conservatives to oppose funding for much-needed housing projects in the communities that actually sent them here to advocate for housing, not to do the opposite. Imagine how difficult, Mr. Speaker, it must have been for the member for Toronto St. Paul's, who represents a city that received $471 million just because he was being muzzled. Can the minister responsible for housing please update this House on what could happen if the leader of the Conservatives actually got his...
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague not only for his question, but for his tremendous advocacy for the city that he calls home. Now, he's asked a question about the member for Toronto St. Paul's, who I will acknowledge is a new member. But I've watched him in question period, and when you review the tapes, you're going to see he seems to believe the role of a member of Parliament is to mimic the slogans and talking points that he hears his leader put on the floor of the House of Commons. Well, we believe the role of a member of Parliament is to advocate for their communities, and he will sit idly by supporting his leader's position to cut hundreds of millions of dollars from his city. His constituents deserve an MP who will stand up to his leader and stand up for his city.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 9 years, these NDP Liberals aren't worth the cost of housing. In December of 2023, these incompetent Liberals gave the City of Toronto $471 million in the so-called Housing Accelerator. The result? In October of 2024, housing starts versus October of 2023 are down 33%. The only thing this Housing Accelerator is accelerating is bureaucracy. When will these NDP Liberals get it through their thick heads? We actually need to build houses for Canadians, not bureaucracy.
So I encourage all members to be all members can be more judicious in the words that they choose. The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Something's interesting. Over the course of the last couple of days, the few times the Conservatives have actually showed any interest in the housing file, they've manipulated statistics to try to paint a false picture. Mr. Speaker, if you actually look at the report from CMHC that came out this week, you'll see that housing starts are up this month. They are up this year, and partially due to the investments that we're making directly in communities. What's fascinating, Mr. Speaker, is that member has been banned by his leader from actually advocating for his community. His constituents have sent him to this House, and his response is to ignore their needs and instead do whatever his leader asks him. That's not representation, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Canadians actually need a minister who will build housing. Despite what he's saying, the facts are very clear. The Housing Accelerator doesn't accelerate anything but bureaucracy. Here are some stats. Housing starts in Nova Scotia down 54%, October of 2024 to 2023. In Ontario, same period, 35% down. British Columbia, same period, 30% down. Halifax, same period, 75% down. The Housing Accelerator is a scam. They know it. When will they actually get the houses built that Canadians need?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
In the spirit of many of the conversations that have taken place today, Mr. Speaker, I will not impugn the motivations of any particular member, but I'm reminded of a famous quote attributed to former British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, who supposedly had said there are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. The statistics that he is using right now dramatically misrepresent the situation. This year, compared to last year, my home province of Nova Scotia is up 23%. This year, compared to last year, the city of Halifax is on pace to build more homes than it ever has in our history. Mr. Speaker, the plan is working. They are advocating for cuts. We will make investments.
Again, I'm going to invite all members. Today has been a particularly tough day in terms of members using language which would not be very judicious. I hope this is just an anomaly for what's going to be happening. And the Speaker will come back to the House later on some of these issues. The Honourable Member from Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last weekend it was reported that David Lavery from Perth, Ontario had been detained by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Mr. Lavery is the hero known as Canadian Dave, who rescued hundreds during the fall of Kabul. After all other Canadian officials had already been evacuated, Canadian Dave and his team stayed on in Kabul to ensure the safe passage of Canadians and others on the final flights out of the country. Now he is in Taliban custody, and we worry for his well-being. What steps is the government taking to bring Dave Lavery home?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague for his very important question. Of course, we're very aware of his case, and I can't give more information due to confidentiality issues, but what I would like to suggest to him is to work with him to make sure that Mr. Lavery comes back home. We will take every single measures to bring him home. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, today marks 1,000 days since Russia began its unprovoked, illegal, full-scale aggression against Ukraine. Since then, we've seen the heroism and resilience of the Ukrainian people on full display as they face Russia's repeated, brutal, and criminal attacks. Canada has committed over $4.5 billion to support Ukraine, and we stand steadfast with Ukraine until its victory. As we mark 1,000 days of this war, can the Minister of National Defence please tell this House what we can do to help Ukraine win?
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is an excellent and a very important question. For 1,000 days, the Ukrainian people have paid a terrible price for brutal Russian aggression. And throughout that time, Canada has been steadfast in our support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people in the face of Russia's unjustified and illegal invasion. And just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the supplementary estimates were tabled in this House. And these supplementary estimates contain $763 million in military aid to Ukraine. That's money for munitions, for training, and the tools that Ukrainians desperately require in order to win. Mr. Speaker, this year, unlike last year, I hope that every member of this House can find the courage to support this desperately required funding.
The Honourable Member from Courtenay, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, mental health care is health care. But the Canadian Mental Health Association tells us over 2.5 million Canadians can't get the help they need while others are forced to use their credit card to get it. The Liberals have let people and families struggling with mental health down. And the Conservatives will cut health care and mental health supports. Canadians will have to pay more or be left behind. When will the Liberals finally make mental health care a true part of Canada's universal health care system so no one has to use a credit card to get the care they need?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the member across the way. Mental health is in fact health, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, we made sure to put $200 billion worth of agreements with every province and territory in this country where mental health and substance use services were a key principal priority, Mr. Speaker. It's time for the provinces and territories to step up. It's time for them to work with us. That is exactly why we announced yesterday the opening of the Youth Mental Health Fund, $500 million to invest in young Canadians and their mental health. We are here doing the work, Mr. Speaker. We're happy to have the provinces and territories step up with us.
The Honourable Member from Timmins, James Bay.
Remembrance Day is a sacred day. It's the one time we put aside our differences to pay tribute to our veterans. We mourn, we celebrate, and yes, we pray for the fallen. This past week, the Conservative leader whipped up misinformation and rage for political gain by falsely claiming that prayers have been banned at the Cenotaph. So on the one hand, we have the Conservatives who will exploit Remembrance Day and cut veteran services, and on the other hand, we have the Liberals who continue to fail veterans. When will these two tired old parties actually stand up for the men and women who have served our country?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for raising this important issue because I think there is no greater obligation for all of us than to express our solemn remembrance and our respect for the service of all members of the Canadian Armed Forces who have sacrificed so much, many of whom have lost their life, and others who chose to serve but survived. And so, Mr. Speaker, I think it is shameful that the opportunity on that particular day to someone to try to score some cheap political points with a deliberate falsehood is, in fact, a real shame.
So I'm going to ask the Honourable Member, because he had mentioned a particular member and saying that there was a deliberate falsehood. that that is not acceptable. So I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister to withdraw that language for its unparliamentary nature.
Mr. Speaker, I will withdraw the fact that the falsehood perhaps not deliberate.
I thank the Honourable Minister. Chers collègues, à la
Colleagues, after discussions amongst all representatives of this House, I understand that there is consent to observe a moment of silence to observe the 1,000 days since the start of Ukraine's invasion by Russia.
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence in commemoration of the 1,000 days since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I now invite honourable members to rise et invite les honorables députés à se lever.